Right. We are back on 454 conference committee. It's just that we were going to start off with the Secretary of State's office, but now, right? Oh, and then I didn't realize it was the Secretary. I didn't see it. Thanks for coming.
It's an honor to be here. Sorry the table's so small. It feels like a secretary desk. It doesn't. Good afternoon. I know that you guys have been at this project with respect to education reform for many, many months now. And we are happy to be back with you. For the record, I'm Sarah Copeland-Hansis, your Secretary of State, and with me,
Sean Sheehan, Elections Director, Secretary of State's Office.
We began engaging in the elections-related issues around this school district restructuring proposal back when the proposal came out at the beginning of session. We've continued to follow that, and we're happy to be here today to review with you some of the elections considerations. There's a memo on your desk in front of you, and it'll be up on your committee pages for you to dive into. If you're having any trouble sleeping at night, you can dig into some of the details of the elections implications of these changes. I think it's important to note that I'm going to run through some of the considerations that you should keep in mind, understanding that these don't necessarily have to be established in this bill that you're working on this year, but that will need to, your timelines and the impact of the time that it takes to prepare for various types of votes will need to be considered as you think about the timeline for establishment of these new school districts. So I think some of the, you can take this as sort of a list of considerations that you may want to refer back to. Main areas of consideration, the establishment of these initial district lines is really going to be the first step in the process of creating these new school districts. And we understand that there are many competing interests who want to have influence into the establishment of new district lines. I think it's important that the legislature consider the impact on the voting public and being able to understand what's happening and what their new school district looks like. And I would caution you to try to create districts that look uniform across the different districts, recognizing that they may not all have the same number of students or be operating the same number of school buildings. But if they have the same board size and the elections of those board members happen consistently across the state, that will be a tremendous advantage in terms of helping voters understand how to engage in their school governance going forward. Creating the wards within the new school. Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things that was really interesting to me through this last property tax cycle was the degree to which statewide news was much more meaningful in most Vermonters' lives than local news. And I think that might be a change in Vermont. And so I was talking to folks in, say, Corinth, who thought that their property tax bills were going up when in fact their property tax bills were going down, right? Mm-hmm. And when you say that it'll be much more sort of easier for voters to understand if there's consistency from place to place, is that towards that, like you all would be doing like statewide communication? Like how is it more transparent for voters if we're doing the same thing around the state?
I think in particular with respect to the election of new school board members, mm-hmm. the timing around that, how many school board members sit on a particular board, and the number of school board members within a particular ward within a larger school district. Those are the things that will be better if they are consistent across the state.
Because you'll be able to communicate about it.
Because we can do a better job of educating voters. And if we can help the average Vermonter understand, well, you've got a 5-person board or you have a 7-person board, and here's where you can find your ward districts lines so you can see, who you're voting for. And we'll get into a little more of the detail on the voter education work that we can do to facilitate voters with a better understanding of how this system works when I get a little further in
Thanks.
the. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. So creating school district wards. This is a highly technical process, and I know this firsthand, having formerly been a legislator and having been chair of the committee that did redistricting for the House back in 2022. And I want to point out some of the sort of best practice recommendations that we would make for this committee to consider in terms of how you establish the wards within these new larger school districts. It should really follow the principles of apportionment that are followed by the Legislative Apportionment Board. And that means that wards should be compact, contiguous, and drawn to achieve substantially equal weighting of the votes within each district. That assures that Vermonters feel well connected to and therefore well represented by the individual who's sitting on the school board from their ward, if those districts, those wards are compact, contiguous, and equally weighted. Each district should have the same number of wards. And we believe that each ward should have one representative to the school board in order to allow for these new school board members to be as close to the communities they represent as possible. You know, as House members, that when you represent 4,000 people, roughly, it's much easier for you to have a personal relationship with many of your voters than, say, a senator who may represent 20 or 60 or more.
We're fortunate that
Thousand
senators who have experienced both sides of it.
Yes,
Senator Cummings has
Uh,
3-seat district, yeah.
3 seats, so 60, 70,000 voters, right? So anyway, small compact districts. Some of the other principles of redistricting that should be considered, I think, is that you will want a school districting apportionment board to be established in legislation, because that board is going to need to have a fair amount of technical expertise. We would offer that you can find technical expertise within the Vermont Secretary of State's office, with the Center for Geographic Information. And I would also recommend making room in the budget for a technical mapping expert. There is software out there that makes this job much easier, but it is highly technical, and it is not something that your average person off the street is going to be able to pick up and use. We think that members of this school districting apportionment board should have a really substantial understanding of the geography, the trade, travel patterns, and social interactions within the state in order to be able to create those boards where Vermonters feel well represented. And I would estimate that it's going to take from 2 to 4 months of concerted work by this board to create ward lines within the new school districts, depending on how many school districts are ultimately created. Another flag for you all in terms of the timeline considerations, the ward boundaries would need to be signed into law by May 15th for an election in November of any given year, or by adjournment date if the election is the following March. And I know that there's been some back and forth about whether these elections will happen in November or in March. I'll get into more detail on recommendations on that in a moment. Obviously, you'll want to reapportion these wards every 10 years, and I would recommend establishing that for the biennium after legislative apportionment, while we still have a technical mapping expert and it's all fresh in your memories. So there is currently consideration of an interim special election currently set for March 2028 within the bill that you all are looking at. You will want to think about banging through some of these considerations ASAP next year in order to have that timeline work out. What is the format of this election in 2028? Is it a universal vote by mail election? If it is, we need to be working with you to establish the timelines for when candidates would need to file petitions so that we can proof the ballots, so that our team has the ability to do that prep work. So we would recommend that you leave yourselves at least 18 months before that initial election to have established these answers to these questions. The governor's proposal had called for 5 member boards. Obviously, you know that best practice is to keep that an odd number. So if you do establish larger boards, that's, seems like a no-brainer. We recommend that the legislature stagger those terms initially so that you don't have people, all phasing off at the same time. And I would also recommend that you consider a 4-year term for these offices. There's a significant amount of knowledge that a school board member needs to have in order to be an effective school board member. And I think a 4-year term would give people time to get their feet under them and become really effective board members. The governor's proposal had called for elections to occur in November of even numbered years along with the general election. And I want to talk about why we support that notion. The general election is our highest turnout election. It is a universal vote by mail election, which means that every Vermonter who is registered and active on our voter registration list will have the opportunity to vote by receiving a ballot in their mailbox. Additionally, and this comes back to Rep. Kornheiser's questions earlier, Secretary of State's office, through our civics program, intends to create a voter guide for the November general election. And given that there is sometimes a vacuum in the news, the media landscape for some of these more local elections, having your school board members included in a voter guide where every voter would be able to have access to a brief statement, some contact information, a website, maybe social media handles, so that they can vet which school board candidate they think most closely matches their own values, would be really important and powerful for the good functioning of these school boards going forward. If the policy decision is made to hold school board member elections in March, I just want to caution you all to understand the many different competing areas of focus that our town and city clerks have for those March elections. Some of them are facilitating an in-person town meeting at the same time as conducting an Australian ballot election. Every 4 years, there's also a presidential primary that happens on top of that. And then there are sometimes school special elections for different types of municipal districts that are also happening at that same time. So there's a lot of reasons to avoid that March timeframe in terms of the conduct of good elections. And then there's a lot of reasons why we think November makes a lot of sense. But clearly these are all decisions that you will need to make. We would recommend that legislation establish who the school.
Let me just play this out with us a little bit. There's a lot going on in November too, and I don't have objections by the way. I don't care which one. But there's a lot going on in the November election. Why is it really different in March than November?
The change with November would be that the candidates for school board would go on to the ballot that is created and prepped and distributed by our office and by the company that sends the universal vote by mail ballots out. So that would take that end of it off. It is one ballot that would be put into the tabulator or hand counted if they're a smaller community. In March, some communities have an in-person town meeting on Monday night, sometimes during the day on Tuesday, sometimes on Saturday. So there are a lot of different things that are happening around the state that will impact different clerks differently. And November is a one day, people vote early, but But the end of it is all at the same time.
And what I hear you saying also is that the November election, because it's more standardized from district to district, has a lot, is you all in your office are able to support it in a much more comprehensive way
Yep.
than you can support the multitude of different activities that are different from district to district. And
Right, because
Okay.
we have a better sense of the challenge that any given town or city clerk has in prepping for
Mhm.
the November election than we do with a municipal election.
Thanks.
I might narrow our discussion a little bit just for the sake of time to sort of the differences we have in our
Mhm.
proposals.
Yes.
So the House proposal in this case sort of follows this format, but moves a lot of it to next year with board drawing it and all of that, and a lot of these decisions being made then. The Senate proposal essentially takes the Act 46 model and moves it forward and lets sort of districts create their own system of how many, what the board would look like, how boards are elected. And so I guess could you speak to the pluses, minuses of one versus the other, or what some of the red flags are of one versus the other?
I think there's always the risk of a perception of unfairness on the part of voters if they are living in a school district of a particular geographic size with 5 members and the neighboring district has a smaller geographic footprint with 11 members. That will mean that the number of people that each school board member represents in those 2 districts is wildly different. And we understand within the constraints of how you will need to build these new school districts that there are going to be differences in size between the 2 districts and population in terms of number of buildings that they're operating. And I think that to the extent that you can keep those consistent across districts in every way that you can, it will be helpful for Vermonters understanding how their government works, so that you don't have to learn an entirely different school board structure because you moved from Newbury to Bradford.
So I guess you'd probably answer the same way. If we look at today's school board elections and how they are, we've got a mixture of, sort of at-large, hybrid at-large, proportional voting power, all these things.
Wildly different. I mean, I was here when Act 46 came to be, and I understand the forces that were at play that demanded that. And I think that the difference between then and 2025 is we are in a unique moment where many people agree that the voters have said, we want you to make some broad sweeping changes. We give you permission to do something different. And I think to the extent that, if we can agree upon the premise that having Vermonters engaged in their school governance by voting is a good thing.
Gosh, I hope we can all agree on that.
If we can agree on, sort of this fundamental principle of living in a democracy, the more we can make that consistent and understandable across different districts in the state, the better that's going to be. Because right now, I would guess that a fair amount of the reasons why we have fewer people participating in school board elections and school budget votes as compared to a November general election is because it is so hard to understand how that system works and who pulls the levers of power and where are the decisions made.
I'd say one of the other differences, again, is it really about who sort of creates the identity of the district. So including, how many board members, how they are elected. Lost my train of thought here. I'm just going to stop there because you already answered it. I think you probably have the same answer.
Mhm.
If it is different than how it is done one place to the other.
Yeah, just.
Oh, I know. It was about the Senate proposal really leaves the district to not only design elections, how many people are on it, and how they are elected. No, lost it again. Never mind. Just go ahead. It's the same.
I think, the other, just to play it out a little, I think it seems to me that people in a given district have no clue what's going on in their districts outside of, they don't care. They only care about what's going on in their district. And so the uniformity doesn't strike me as, not, I hear what you're saying, doesn't strike me as actually being that important. Because I think people know how it works in their district, and that's what they want to focus on. And I do think that if we were to go to November, you'd have much higher turnout, obviously, no matter what the system was. And then you can also play the thing about if it has been set up internally, you could have more buy-in than if it is imposed from the outside by the legislature. So, just exploring these things, and we took one view that is different than the House view. And those are some of I think there's also the issue that we have to think through all of this is the sizes of districts. And if those haven't been done yet, and then if you have, smaller districts, larger districts, then it might make sense for them to operate differently. So I don't know, I'm just, those are the things running through my head as we're talking about this and some of the stuff that we talked about.
Just a basic question. When the legislature redistricts, the legislature is the final authority on those lines. In a school district where somebody, probably with the assistance of the Secretary of State's office, is setting up all of these lines within a district, who's the final, gives it the final blessing that this is good?
So what I would recommend is that the legislature establish a school district apportionment board.
Okay.
But ultimately, that board would make a recommendation to the legislature, and the legislature would have
So
to
we would
adopt
do
it
that.
into law.
Okay.
So I think at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to protect the constitutional rights of Vermonters.
Yeah, no,
right?
totally. I just
Yeah.
was just curious how it's going to be the final.
And nobody by the way is arguing anything other than one person. We all, everybody understands that. Just a matter of how we get there.
One of the things I'm really struck by in your testimony is, and I, was not on the application for any, it's possible that you all put all of this testimony in this as well.
We did.
Okay, great. That of course, this is really complicated and there are a lot of really important details to figure out and that none of them have to be decided in this bill. And it might be, and I don't know if you took all of this testimony in the Senate.
No.
So, it strikes me that sort of on our list of things for next year and things for this year, this could all be a next year if that works with our other timelines.
We had it set.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you're absolutely right about that. And I think the impact that it does and should have on this year's bill is with respect to the legislature's expectation on when these new districts would be established and the sort of the run up that's necessary if this is the start date. When does the election happen? When do candidates file? When do districts have to be drawn? When does the, ward apportionment committee need to meet? All of those steps are contained in here as consideration for you all, because it really is not as simple as we're going to start this January of 2027. Poof, go make it happen.
Secretary of State, I have a very obnoxious question for you. Given the sort of time frame we're on to figure all of this out, I'm wondering if this really lovely narrative has ever, if you've ever drafted sort of a timeline version of it for us to be able to refer to as we're working through other timelines in the
We
bill.
can certainly do that. We can possibly, that occasionally it's more helpful to have a picture than a lot of words.
Yes.
And
it would be sort of
yes.
a picture that was mostly words, but
Yes.
okay.
Picture with dates, how many weeks does it take?
Yes,
How many months
yes,
does it take?
yeah. And like therefore that are
work
concurrent
that
things that are.
Yep, we can certainly do that for you.
That would be so nice. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Really appreciate
Some of
it.
that is included in our
Yeah.
era of timeline.
Yes.
If there are no other questions, I will leave you to the very important work that you're doing. And I thank you for it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
I did remember my question, by the way.
Do you want to ask it?
No.
You can email it to me.
I wrote it down just in case.
Well, maybe just one thing I'm thinking through is that, so, you know, we had a map that came through in January. I think depending on the bill, it's December, November of 25, and then you have a legislature adopt a map or not in January 26th.
Let's say we do.
Let's say we do. And then you need to approve wards by May of 2026. Be ready for the November general election. What about I admit, I think there's going to be some, especially within the SUs, the possibility of districts, you know, saying, hey, we don't want to be partially operating anymore. We want to be part of a fully operating structure, or some that are maybe fully operating and say we want to, you know, go to a partially operating. I think there's going to be some jobs. So I think we're only talking about a half a dozen communities, no more than that, but can that fit into adopt in January wards? I mean, you have to know what the districts are before, you know, exactly who's in the district before you can the wards.
I think you teed up some up sort of something in the House position, actually, towards like to fulfill what you're asking about. So not to step too far into the education policy toes, but there's two pieces. One, the idea that a ward districting task force happens concurrent to some degree with the districting boundary task force. Someday I'll figure out what the difference between a task force and a study committee is. And then I think we'll meet some of that sort of timeline goal. And then the second thing is that the work of the commission and the listening tour and the district task, it's not listen, whatever.
District boundary subcommittee.
No. So the district boundary subcommittee being deeply connected to the commission's work, even though they're somewhat separate bodies. The commission is doing this really comprehensive listening project where they'll get that exact feedback in communities with a paid facilitator, really strong communication support in order to get exactly that feedback to the boundary committee. Can you say that all with the right words?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, one of the reasons we tied the two together was so that, you know, people can provide that the district boundaries would be drawn in a way that was reflective or at least inclusive of a good public engagement process, which is why we tied it to the Commission on Public Education on the future of public education. I think your question goes to the bigger issue of how do we accommodate a world of larger districts and areas that operate and areas that don't operate, and the continued need to have approved independent schools provide that public education where no other services are available.
Is that where you were going?
Well, yeah, no, I'm just thinking more of just at the municipality level. I think there are going to be some towns that will reevaluate whether they want to be partially operating or fully operating, and they may look at the landscape and they may go, this is, you know, we need to no longer be partially operating. We need to be fully operating, go with this group of people, or maybe the other way. We've been fully operating, but we should move to partially operating, go with this group of people. And those are going to require some, I mean, those are big community decisions, obviously. And I just want to, you know, make sure that they have the opportunity to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And we can accommodate that.
I feel like that's included in the House. I feel like that conversation is accommodated in the House version of the bill.
I'll go back and we'll read through it again.
what format should we follow for the rest of this today? I think,
So
We have-
tomorrow we have testimony, follow up to this from, legislative council. And then the tax department, I think, is coming in at some point to talk about the capacity to handle the proposed studies.
given that we're set to finish this work on Friday and today is Wednesday, I think it might be, if we want to start talking about areas of agreement or offers of agreement, and sort of, does that feel possible? Is that too soon for you? What would you?
Are you thinking tomorrow?
I was thinking right now.
Even a chance.
Listen, we may not reach, like sign off.
Yeah, and we don't have sort of documents prepared. We
Right,
have notes
yes.
to discuss.
We just
So maybe we could
conversation.
vibe our way through offers a little bit. And then prepare things for consideration. How does that sound?
Yeah, no.
Technical terms as always.
Starting-
Representative
We
Cornhusker.
also have to be, as we're doing this, thinking about the third side by side.
Of course.
Going to fit into this and not. That's just the reality.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to figure out some of our differences before we add even more players to the mix, but yeah. Yes,
Perhaps.
Yeah.
It depends on each.
it does indeed.
Let's look.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, so, kind of given what we just heard, we can talk about our approaches to a district boundary task force, line drawing subcommittee, whatever you want to call it. I think that we are probably more alike than we are different. It's just sort of the mechanics of how it works. I think that there is, just to advocate for our position, I think that there is value in taking advantage of the work of the commission and its public engagement process. And while the group of people, whoever that happens to be, are coming up with district lines to be sort of created, our sort of list of who should be on each sort of similar. Yours are sort of more organization based. Ours are more just picks by the Senate, by the House, and by the governor, as well as legislators. I'm not,
Yours kind of has this subgroup.
so this would be,
Subgroup.
so the mechanics of it would be, it's a non-voting subcommittee. That way they sort of don't have to be on the commission. They don't have to be controlled by the commission because they're non-voting. So they would sort of work independently, but under the umbrella of the commission for two main reasons. One, there's some money available, and two, because of the public engagement process that's ongoing. So that was really the idea behind that. Lists of people, I think, of who does what is always trips us up, no matter which committee or whatever we're talking about.
Always.
Happy to have a conversation about mix and match and what you think.
There's also staffing. Has anyone asked the Department of Ed if they can staff this? Because that's who the commission's using.
So the only, in the House version, the only requested, there's money available to hire consultant as needed, and maybe we need to borrow your appropriation instead. But that the assistance is only asked for from the Agency of Digital Services. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by staffing who.
Well,
I think you're right. You probably don't have to have the people who sort of like put it up on
and
Teams.
we have staff that have been drafting this, that have all the background numbers and, we're looking at using the state GIS system. If this isn't a legislative committee, we lose that. And the Department of Education, from everything I've seen, does not have an abundance of staff. And so just getting things typed up and printed out,
Good point.
I think might be a consideration. We have staff sitting over there that have a significant background in this.
I don't know if they have a significant background in redistricting.
No, but
But I wonder if sometimes we add paid facilitators to task forces that are this important. We've had conversations about the need for mapping specialists, if that might make more sense, so that we know that it's adequately staffed and we're not burdening our staff,
right.
though, yeah.
I mean, a mapping specialist is somebody you could hire. You don't necessarily have them on
Yes.
the commission. I think we had the same discussion last year with the the financial task force, which got subsumed into the commission.
Embedded, I believe. No, we actually met at least a dozen times, I think, Senator Cummings. We met a lot.
Well, maybe we don't need to rehash that.
We had to have our report in November.
But to Senator Cummings' point, it's also the small staffing tasks that are probably very important, like who puts it up on Teams?
The minutes,
Who sends
the
out- yeah.
agenda,
Appreciate
the
that.
phone calls, the doodle polls.
So definitely an AO, we don't want to further burden AOE with that. I wonder if we could reach agreement on who is on it and then figure out the staffing from there.
Well, the way yours is, the map drawing will be effectively done by this subcommittee.
Yes.
But I think whether it's a subcommittee or a committee, we still will need members, right? So I wonder if we could just talk about the members first, just in an effort to agree on something.
I'll just rate a couple of red flags with your list. The chair of the School Boards Association is something that changes. I think you probably, if we were going to go that route, I would go with the executive director or the designee. The Association of School Business Officials doesn't have an executive director, so they want to say president or designee. And I have never heard of the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, but I assume it's
Oh, they're great.
something. Okay.
That's who works on the Act 250.
Yeah, we'll know it's the RPCs.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll just tell you, sort of the philosophy behind ours, which is loaded up with former educators, is just they know how these systems operate, and they know sort of the lay of the land and where they have better knowledge than a lot of people of, like, oh no, that town may be in Addison County, but it's part of a Rutland County school district, just those sorts of things.
I think the other thing that I appreciate about the House version is that people who are intimately involved in this right now, today, rather than retired from it, sometimes are, and it's one of my concerns about having legislators on it at all, is just, it's an incredibly small p political activity, this redistricting. And so the more we can have people on this with sort of technical and social expertise rather than political expertise, I feel like the more successful they'll be.
But we went that route just so that, yeah, we had fewer people with a vested interest.
Yeah.
So if legislators aren't going to get to vote, why should they give up their time over the summer to be on this?
If they're going to give up their vote. Yeah.
It says legislative members for non-voting members.
These are non-voting members of the commission. They are not.
Well, I thought
I've accepted that legislators will be on this. I'm just gonna continue to resist it until the end. I agree that legislators should be on it. I just don't
But
want
if
to be on it.
this group is apart from the commission, I've also been appointed to the commission. That means I don't get to vote as a legislator on this task force.
I think so the way I think of it is, you know how the Education and Finance Subcommittee did work and then that work was relitigated and voted on by the commission, right?
Yeah, that you don't.
In this context, and the idea of them not being non-voting is that it's not relitigated by the commission. It's never screened or going through the.
That makes it more efficient, but I got to vote on the finance.
I imagine in some universe you could be on both.
Much of this was for a technical reason. In other words, a subcommittee needs to be made up of members of the commission who are voting members. So this is to, and we can have Ledge Council explain why we went this route, but we had to make them non-voting members because we wanted them to operate independent of the commission and that their work would be independent of the commission. In other words, the commission would not relitigate what comes out of here. This group would present to the legislature whatever number we decide on of recommendations.
So I would resign from the commission if I wanted to be on this.
Yes, you would have to,
I would have
but it's also a good way to not be assigned to this.
to be assigned to this, so.
I don't even listen to the comments.
So I've never figured out your construct, what the task force actually does. If the subcommittee of the commission is doing the map and you've got the task force.
We have no task force. There's the commission and a subcommittee of the commission.
Okay, it's just okay.
It's called a task force, not a subcommittee. Right here.
That's our side. Our side is.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great. Sorry.
Structure is unwieldy.
Yes.
I think it seems unwieldy in statute, but it's more wieldy
No, I've been
in real life.
The commission meetings.
Actually, I haven't seen you in a while, but
So actually,
I've been here.
because I'm still unclear. We have the commission right now.
yes.
What's the commission that exists right now? What's their role in this? And what is the role of the new members that we're talking about?
Okay, so this is set up, again, we did it through the commission for two reasons. One, there was a budget available, and two, to integrate it with the public engagement process. The work of the commission is set up in statute. It's being refined here. They continue with that work. The subcommittee is really operating independent of what the commission is doing, except when it comes to the public engagement discussions to try to coordinate those better. Otherwise, this subcommittee is to do the same work as the task force that you have, to come up with maps to present to the legislature as recommendations.
But the commission has, I think it has to have a meeting and all 13.
This is all independent of the operation.
Okay, but is this task force going, how are they engaging in the public engagement? Are they going to the meetings with the commission?
Well, so the commission's public engagement process is a little different than that.
Yes.
We've hired a consultant, and so much of their work is taking place somewhat independent of commission meetings. Yes, the commission itself is by statute supposed to meet all over the state and has been. But at the same time, there is a public engagement process going on with a consultant that is both integrated with that and not. So they're going out and asking questions and talking with, if you remember in the statute for the commission, there was a long list of Vermonters to be engaged with. And so they are helping the commission fulfill that work.
So
one of the things they can, one of the sort of topics they can talk about is, Vermonters, what do you want to see in a future state of larger, fewer districts.
And so I imagine that the work of public engagement would then be given to the subcommittee to say, here is information for you to use to decide, to accommodate, this particular configuration, or this is a really core value for Vermonters that you should be thinking about as you create these new districts. We've, have recommendations on factors that need to be included, right, in redistricting that we've come up with, but Vermonters might have others. And the commission can sort of offer some of those through this listening project to the subcommittee. And the subcommittee can say, hey, we're trying to figure this thing out. We've thought we're technical experts. We've thought about this all, but we're curious if you've heard anything, commission, about what Vermonters want about this particular thing. It's just like, if we have two things happening simultaneously, it's really great for them to coordinate with each other. And it's easier to coordinate if you're functionally coordinated and not just. And I wonder, is it helpful to have Beth explain how the two things are set up? Okay, cool. Okay. I feel like we're explaining how it works and it's just that you disagree with how we think it should work rather than don't understand how you think it should work, which is fine. I just don't want to keep on explaining if it's an area of disagreement rather than an area of understanding.
I think it's partially understanding.
Okay.
And so our proposal is just much more direct. When we have a budget, so you talk about the 50,000, we have a budget in ours of 100,000 actually.
It would be great to move them.
And it is to have, a group of people, that's their job, that's what we're doing. And the legislature has determined who they are, how it should work. So I think it's just,
Those all are,
indirect.
we have determined how it works, what they're doing. I mean, the tasks of the two groups are very much the same.
You on the subject, or should we let that be mulled over?
I think we
revisit
need to talk.
Okay.
tomorrow?
Great. And think about membership. I mean, I think
We're very close in membership.
absolutely. And the roles and responsibilities are very similar. It's sort of where the operating environment for each one.
Have the third party.
But it would be great to come to agreement on the members, at least, if we could do that, next time we talk. Do you want to talk about page 6?
Sure. I mean, we have a very small disagreement over how many maps are to be produced. You say no fewer than 3 options. We say no more than 3 options. I would say, I think it would be hard for the legislature to take more than 3 recommendations. I would really think it'd be more helpful to keep it limited to 3 at most.
I'm wondering if in the time frame, if we need those next January, if doing more than 1 is a possibility. I mean, if we're looking at going out and talking to the public, which won't be 1 meeting, we're looking at doing a lot of technical work and map drawing and sizing, and we have at this point almost no staff. I'm just wondering how I think we put a lot of time in to people. And sometimes if you have too many people, you kill getting something out by the end. We haven't got enough staff, and I'm just wondering if to ask you ask people to do the impossible and you'll get nothing.
Absolutely.
And I would like to get this a little more focused.
I think we need at least two because your proposal includes one that includes supervisory unions. And so I think it's important to have one that includes supervisory unions and one that doesn't. So I think we need at least two.
Oh, that.
Well,
And so,
I'm
Yes.
I'm a little unclear as to what you're advocating for. Your proposal is asking for no fewer than three.
Yeah, well, I think we need to decide on the size and the shape of a task force. And then I think we've sat here under the Golden Dome and written something. I just have questions about the feasibility of, we didn't get the finance subcommittee of the commission able to meet until October. And what was it, the last of September? And then we had to have our report out so that the commission could vote on it in November. And the end was what we produced was a brainstorming session. But we didn't have time to do the work. And I think we know to get any size group together before September is virtually impossible. To not be sure that we have the staffing necessary. None of these would be my personal choice.
I think both of our proposals are committed to having the staffing necessary, and I think we can certainly work to strengthen the staffing. I think we all agree that we want this district mapping process to succeed and to have the structures it needs to succeed. I think there's a question about how many maps is realistic. I hear you asking that. And so your proposal is no fewer than three. Our proposal is no more than three.
I don't know if more than three or less. One would be my preference, to be honest with you. But what troubles me is that there's, the notion that only one map would allow for the continuation of independent schools and tuition.
I certainly did not say that.
No, that's, in various pieces of language here, and I'm not sure why we would recommend a map why any map would get recommended that doesn't work for the entire state.
I imagine that the idea is that all maps would work for the entire state.
And again, you're going to the bigger issue of how do we create a statewide system that continues to accommodate the need for independent schools in areas where there aren't.
Right, I would assume that every proposal would have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we may all have different ways of solving that. Mine is, and this is for a future discussion, once we have our sort of district lines drawn, then we figure out how we charter those districts in order to say, this town does not have any other option but then to continue to continue to have to use an independent school. But this is a bigger discussion for a
It
later
is.
date.
And I am having a process confusion moment because your position seems to have a tendency towards more than three and ours is three or fewer. And yet two of you are arguing for one. And I don't know what to do about that.
I think that we use three as the cap. I think that would be.
Okay, great. So we found agreement on something and it's the House position.
I don't think
Delightful.
that was a particular want to have more.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Okay.
I just question whether or not the timeline could produce.
So then we have to go back and figure out whether we want to,
Yeah.
But
And that's why we have no more than three. So if they run out of time, they could do two.
Oh,
Or one,
Yep.
absolutely. And I guess one little tiny thing, since you mentioned timeline, yours wraps up on November 1st. Ours wraps up on December 1st. I'm not sure why the sooner
I think,
wrap up.
let's see.
Well, I think there was, I think the reality is once you get to the middle of November, you get into Thanksgiving and the holidays.
I just would,
Be all done, but
I'd rather
I don't know.
provide as much time as
I
possible.
think also possibly a little more time to socialize things because
Mhm.
uh,
So we're prepared in January.
in order to, if we do end up with some kind of award system in the legislature, in order to have that done by the end of the session, we got to top the map in the first week. Not literally, but you get the point.
Our timelines are the same, and actually it moves at a more doable pace.
Yes, that's true.
There's the minimum number of students and the maximum number of students.
Yeah, so we have in ours that the whichever body is coming up with new district maps, that there should be a minimum, to the extent practical, a minimum of 4,000 students in that district. And this really sort of goes to the importance of scale and having districts that are big enough so that that foundation formula bends the cost curve.
Where are you, by the way?
So if you look in the green on 7,
Section or page?
page 7, well, I'm only gonna do pages.
Yeah,
Like I said,
that's why I didn't see it, because it's in the green.
It's really dark.
So dark.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't have a problem with an 8,000 maximum, since I'm not sure anybody wants to go to districts the size of 8,000 students. But, both I think the agency and their testimony that we all had together, as well as the School Boards Association, talked a lot about, in order to achieve scale, you need to have
I think
larger numbers.
and in all the modeling we've done, we're gonna need a certain scale in order to achieve both the tax, like the significant tax equity that's gonna be needed, grand list equity, all of those things. And so I'm worried we're gonna because we have those other guardrails in place, I'm worried we're gonna put them at a disadvantage if we don't also add this minimum.
we also might want to be thinking about school districts or SUs with a minimum of. Because within an SU, the districts could be 4,000. I think that the scale we can discuss.
Yep.
We had no more than 8, you've got no fewer than 4, but I think it's not just school districts, it's school districts or SUs. Depending on which way that goes.
Yeah, we don't, ours doesn't mention SUs in any part of that, but happy to consider that.
Did we just any kind of agreement on that?
Felt that way.
Well, but you have no more than 8,000, you've got no fewer than 4.
Right.
To the extent, we say average and to the extent practical. Yeah, to
We do
provide
have
some,
a comment from the elephant in the room about sizes. We didn't like our cat.
Oh, the administration.
we have no cap, but I can't
So
conceive
you all
of a
are-
world where we would ever have over 8,000 students.
Yeah, but you all are okay with sticking to having a minimum as well? Okay, great.
We've got a copy.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, tentatively, okay. Yes, okay. I don't want to push you into anything. I just want to have a.
Page 8. I think we're basically in agreement. If you guys are okay, we can push it to December 1st, just to give it a little extra time. But in terms of, if we go your route with a task force, I like the inclusion of the no fewer than 2 public hearings. If we go our route, it's connected to the work of the commission.
And so there's already public
So
hearings.
it's already sort of public beach in that sense. We both provide for resources. You have in sort of the list of things to be detailed master proposal, which shall include grand list value of new proposed school districts. I think that's easy to get. the pros and cons of each proposal. That would be within the opinion of whatever group is doing this, but it seems to be a fine request. I don't really have a problem with it.
No, my only concern is that would take
Time.
a lot of time to draft well. It seems like a particularly
If we're trying to keep them to
political
drawing
thing
lines.
to draft. And so just those kinds of narratives take time.
So if we were to sort of move along to pages 10 and 11, that's where we get into the transitional school boards. The our way of dealing with this is to say this is a chapter 2 next year thing. The original governor's proposal on H454 had actually some language I think we could definitely work with next year in terms of transitional school boards and what their roles are and what they do. We had the same testimony in our committee from the Secretary of State's office. And so I find myself concerned about creating different kinds of school representation, different kinds of voting, and all that if you sort of leave districts, especially unelected transitional school boards, to decide all of that. You know, even just right down to the basic idea of like how many school board members you're going to have. To me, these are jobs for the legislature to do as we charter these districts.
And I think regardless, it's like decisions we don't have to make right now. And so I feel like as if we could remove things to disagree about, that would be delightful.
That is true. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we're not putting things off that are going to set us back.
Yeah, agreed.
And the counter to the argument about the transitional boards is they're going to be made up of people who actually know their district. And as opposed to,
Well, an elected board would know its district too, right?
yes, but a transitional board will also know the district.
Yeah, and like I said,
Likely come from,
there is no doubt we're going to have transitional boards as far as I'm concerned at some point. But sort of how they're selected and what powers we give them, I think, are where we probably need to spend some more time. And I would say next year.
I wonder if we could tentatively agree to punt it to next year, pending that timeline from the Secretary of State's office and our agreement on timelines. Just very tentative agreement.
Our pictured timeline that we created has all the sort of steps with the
Oh, really?
Secretary of State stuff.
Sorry, I looked at that a lot for a while and now it's gone from there.
so we'll note
Okay.
with a question mark.
I think we're moving into areas where there's not a lot. Class size and minimums. I don't know what to do about a disagreement over numbers that are super close. So I would say we can leave that for another time. I'm basically comfortable. I assume my colleagues are comfortable with either one. On page 15, we go from the.
And is it safe to assume that you all are also comfortable with either one?
No, I'm not comfortable. I'm more comfortable with the Senate. If we're going to go with minimum numbers, I want to go toward the lower numbers a little bit.
Okay.
More rural friendly.
We will note that.
Yeah.
And then the same, I assume, would be your feeling on the shalls and to and the 3 and may.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we are at graduation requirements.
Which was in the administration's proposal
Correct.
and in the House version.
Yeah. And you had said this morning that you didn't include it because you had to take any testimony on it. I think, well, that calendar is right next to it.
No, that's what council.
Later on.
Couple
Okay.
pages on.
All right. Did you have an objection to creating statewide graduation requirements other than the fact you hadn't taken testimony on it?
Well, they're kind of one and the same thing. So I think this is one of those that we could just, leave till next year. It would be interesting to take some testimony on it, but I don't think we're in a position to sign off on something we've taken no testimony on.
How does this fit in the timeline, Peter?
I think this gets started right away.
Does the agency need all that lead time to do it on or before July 1st, 2027?
So you're asking, why do we pick July 1st, 2027?
No, I'm saying if we punted it till next year, would they be able to do this by July 1st, 2027? Does the punting slow it down?
That'd be a question for them,
Okay.
not for me. However, I think if we signaled that that is the direction we want to go, there's no reason they can't begin that work. Section 8, page 17. Sorry, I was using sections, not pages. The yellow on page 17. We'll have to give that some thought, but I think it's fair to say we appreciate the sentiment behind it. I think everything else is school construction up to page 19. This one, as we talked about earlier, is a little trickier. It probably is this could be an area for thinking about where we can meet in the middle. With you at 25 and us at 51.
25 with a geographic restriction.
Yeah, I think we look at it as that we moved kind of voluntarily from there being 40 some odd 46, 47 schools to something closer to 19, and that's actually something that we feel very strongly about.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'd say the other, besides just sort of those two numbers and your sort of two-part test here, I totally appreciate it. And I thought that was very thoughtful. But it's just 25% of the Vermont resident student population as opposed to 25% of the student population. I think that's something we're going to have to think about and discuss as we sort of look at if you have 5 in a class of 100, or I'll use 4 because it's easier, 25%, then you only have to have 1 student.
Yeah, so a lower percentage, I think makes more sense with the inclusion, with that broader definition of student.
Then I think we all agree that the purpose here is to recognize that some independent schools have traditionally fulfilled the role of public schools in parts of our state.
Well, and that there are ecosystems in different regions of the state. And it's the ecosystem is as important as the notion of the individuals. And we have, up in the northeast quadrant, the southwest quadrant, and then in a quadrant kind of around Ledford Academy. It's not just one school or another, it's the notion of ecosystem. So that's important.
Oh, graduation requirements. Oh, that was because I was starting with state board work. Graduation and calendar are on page 21. Again, these were priorities of the administration. We agreed. Calendar has been asked for years. I'm not sure the administration actually knows how actually difficult that's going to be to pull off. But anyway.
I think even the legislature would benefit from having a single statewide calendar, like
everybody.
all the different student vacations.
Oh, absolutely. So with teachers whose kids go to another school district that has a different one, then.
This gets to be, get into philosophical discussions here. I mean, I think the notion of having a one size fits all across Vermont just may not be the right way to do it. You may want to have just different districts doing it differently, being innovative and not being bound by something. It's a little, that's just I always have a personal bias against one size fits all, and something that can stifle innovation and creativity in one place because it's statewide. So that's, I'm not wild at all about the notion of a statewide school calendar.
I feel like part of the reason that we're in the situation that we're in that led us to sitting at this table right now is some of our sort of continued insistence on that idea that every area needs to do things in its own special way. And at the scale we operate at, I think that winds up duplicating efforts and resources in a way that's not necessary.
Maybe you can argue that it can,
Yes.
but not necessarily. So anyway.
I'll just-
Also took
Yeah.
zero against the money.
I'll make a plug for CTEs. I know that this calendar issue is a challenge for CTEs that sometimes straddle two different calendars.
The larger districts will clean up a lot of that.
Yeah.
To some degree.
The budget appropriation, we just got the memo.
We'll look at it tonight.
Okay.
We just have it.
Oh, I didn't send that to Annie, by the way.
Annie, I think Annie found it.
Any found it sent it to all of us. The budget memo from the AOE on the $4 million breakdown.
Oh, Scott gave it. Did you go? No, that was. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we are into more of the foundation formula stuff as we get into sparsity and all of that. So very good. Yeah, we can probably, if you guys want to take some time and we can stop at what we just went through.
Okay.
Let you guys, rather than dump it all
Mhm.
on the table right now, maybe just stick with the governance and policy parts.
We want to try to meet again later tonight or start again tomorrow morning?
We're on at 9.
9 o'clock. Yeah.
9.